welcome everybody to the second seminar of our seminar series, the third season. Feel like it's Netflix, season 3 of the Revelation Reception Network seminar series. And I just want to alert you all that in general, this season we are sticking with Thursdays at 5 p.m. Germany time, which is almost always 11 a.m. Eastern time in the United States. Everybody else, I'm sorry, you have to figure out the time zones you're in. With the exception of 2 presentations. One will be, I saw her a minute ago. Where'd she go? Sorry, I have to do some admin stuff here. Lynn Huber, I think, is going to be presenting on a Monday. And I also think Colin McAllister, who's also here, will be presenting on a Monday. Otherwise, everyone, I think, is presenting on Thursdays at 5 p.m. There's been some questions. Also, please, if you're not already on the email list, send a message to any of us. You can find us all on the internet. Any of the organizers, that's myself, Christian, Tom Schmidt, or Régis Brunet, or hit us all on social media, and we will sign you up to the email list if you would like us to do that. With that stuff out of the way, I'm going to pass the baton to Christian Cardoso, who will be introducing our guest today. Thank you.
All right, so welcome to this session that has as its title Armageddon, the mountain meeting is Megiddo. The talk will be in charge of Laurentiu Mot, whom I'm honored to present. He was actually my advanced Greek professor in my PhD. And he serves as the principal of Adventus University in Cernica, Romania, where he teaches New Testament, and he also coordinates PhD dissertations in theology at the University of Bucharest. His area of expertise is the Greek language of the Book of Revelation, where he has many publications, including his monograph on the solecisms of Revelation, a Greek hypothesis, which is really good. You should check it out. So with that, Laurentiu, the time is yours.
Thank you very much, Christian. Thank you very much, Nathan. It was important to specify, and you did, the place I come from. I feel privileged to be surrounded by reception history experts. I'm not one, but I'm very happy to be around, give careful look to what you work, and after spending a number of years in Revelation studies, primarily in the area of linguistics, lexicography, semantics, and things like that, I realized that when you want to do let's say, a more comprehensive study, you do have to delve seriously into this area of reception, which is why I came timidly, I would say, close to your group. And again, thank you very much for having me and for allowing me to be part of it. I will share my screen right away. The presentation is here. The presentation is, I'm going to go full screen. I hope it's going to go well. Yeah. So the presentation is based on a extensive study that I've made on the etymology and semantics of the term Armageddon. But since I'm in a group of reception history, I try to adapt that study and not go too much into the linguistic side of that study, unpublished yet, by the way. So I'm happy to just go on and tell you my view after reviewing a little bit what happened before in the history of its interpretation. That's Revelation 16:16 primarily, and also the sixth plague in general. Much has been written about the noun Armageddon in the attempt to elucidate its meaning. Many studies built on the premise that the term is a compound noun and somehow a syntactic relation between the two terms, Ar and Megiddo, must be foundational for its meaning. Thus, Mount Megiddo, mountain of Megiddo, mountain of assembly, a supposed misspelling of the name Megiddo, to name only very few, were put forward as possible meanings. The relational uncertainty between Mount and Megiddo made some or other scholars dispose of the mountain component altogether. That's another stream of interpretation. What followed were interpretations of Armageddon from the perspective of Megiddo alone. So no talk about what the mountain is, which mountain, and so on. Whether etymologically or from the perspective of Megiddo's fame in the Old Testament narrative, other views were formed. But even here, the continuous dissatisfaction with the results kept the flame of interpretative creativity burning. It is probably fruitful to hypothesize that it really does not matter how one translates the combination R plus Megiddo. At stake is not to define the grammatical or geographical relationship between the two component nouns, but rather to establish their interpretation at the level of prophetic and narrative symbolism. The claim argued for below is that Armageddon refers in symbolic language to a stage at the end of Earth's history in which the eschatological Babylon, that is the mountain, will meet its end, or its Megiddo. For that matter, if a syntactical formulation needs to be established, Armageddon would be, in my view, the Megiddo of the mountain, not vice versa. In the following lines, I will first present and critique the most important proposals from antiquity to closer to us, I would say, although in this presentation, primarily, I did not include everything that is in the larger paper. Then I will proceed with building the case for the claim expressed above, with the purpose of showing that the interpretation of the language of Revelation, primarily its apocalyptic vocabulary, is richer than at first sight. So, early etymological proposals. First of all, this will lead us from Hippolytus to Luther, roughly. Hippolytus seems to be the first to have commented on the meaning of Armageddon in a fragment that is only extant in Arabic. The Roman father describes the eschatological place as, and that's his words, smooth or trodden place. Another possible meaning for him is, for Armageddon, is that it represents the valley of Jehoshaphat. In a lexicon credited to Jerome, the term Armageddon is defined to be in reference to the things before awakening, the awakening term being left unexplained. So this is just a try to kind of translate or make brief sense of the term without, like I said, further elaboration. Jerome, on from his perspective, offers 4 definitions for the term Armageddon, prioritizing the last 2. And I'm quoting him. Armageddon means either an uprising of the roof, that's number 1, or an uprising in the former things, that's number 2. But a better meaning might be a mountain of robbers, number 3, or a round number, and that's number 4. So he is more in favor of the last 2. Venerable Bede or Bede picks only the second and the fourth from the list before. He's simply reviewing what has been said before, so he picks number 2 and number 4. The anonymous 8th century reference Bible mentions only the second from those 4 um, explained by Jerome. And that second option, this reference Bible explains as the saints liberated from the persecution. Now we come to Oecumenius, who is also followed by Andreas. For them, Armageddon is rendered as Magedon, and it is interpreted as cutting or that which is cut in two. So here we have to point, first of all, or not overlook that the name in their commentaries is just Megiddo, so to speak, not Armageddon, or Magedon, not Armageddon. And also the interpretation relates to a text in Zechariah, as we will see shortly. According to the two Greek expositors, as well as to other ancient and early medieval authorities, Tychonius, Caesarius of Arles, and Bede, the meaning points to the cutting down of the wicked nations when they will attack the holy city after the millennium, as described in Revelation 20, verse 9. The cutting idea comes from the Septuagint rendition of the expression the plain of Megiddo in Zechariah 12, 11. Instead of transliterating the name Megiddo, the translator of Zechariah 12, 11 in the Septuagint renders it as the plain of cutting off or the plain of massacre. So there's no direct correspondence between the Hebrew word and the Greek term, but it's really an interpretation. This in turn may have derived from the Hebrew verb to penetrate or to cut, which is gadad. On his part, Andreas fills in the blanks a little bit, and he says, so we should think that the nations gathered and led for battle there by the devil will be slaughtered, since the devil rejoices in human blood. So Armageddon is, in this view, a battle in which the victims are the nations gathered by the three spirits like frogs in Revelation 16, 16. Tychonius touches on the term, and he considers the passage that is another recapitulation, and he's referring here to Revelation 20, the battle of Gog and Magog, the post-millennial battle. And he says, citing John, he gathered them to war, whose number is as the sand of the sea, and they went up unto a wide plain and surrounded the camp of the saints and the beloved city. That is, in Tychonius's view, the church. In a different direction, but still in this view of etymological renditions, Luther builds on the root herem, the Hebrew root herem, and comes up with a marginal comment that Armageddon refers to damned or helpless warrior or army. And this would come from herem et God. This is in reference to two Hebrew terms, herem, the consecrated thing, and God, which is luck. Again, contextualizing a little bit, for Luther, and I'm quoting, the gospel thereupon increases and attacks the papacy on all sides by means of many learned and devout preachers. And the throne of the beast, the Pope's power, becomes dark and wretched and despised. But they grow angry and confidently defend themselves. For three frogs, three foul spirits, issue from the mouth of the beast and stir up kings and princes against the gospel. But this does not help. Their battle takes place nonetheless at Armageddon. The frogs are the sophists, such as Faber, Eck, Emser, etc. So it's interesting to see, first of all, how Luther contextualizes view of John and sees the Battle of Armageddon as being between, let's say, the established church Catholicism primarily and the newly emerging Protestant church. In a marginal note to the Geneva Bible, it is said that the Battle of Armageddon is God's reversal of the reproach his people suffered with the defeat of Josiah. That's an interesting note that I wanted to include because later in my argument I will refer to this, but in a different sense, in a different way. Conclusion about early proposals. It is quite hard to credit the early interpretations because their proponents hardly engage with the text in such a way as to prove how their translation of Armageddon brings light into the passage of the sixth plague. I mean, it's not that they don't try, but it's not a serious engagement with, let's say, the intricacies of the semantics of this term. They are trying to propose different views. Some simply, let's say, resume or reaffirm what has been said earlier, and not much beyond. Regarding modern etymological conjectures, here there could be much to say, but I just opted to quickly describe two examples. One is related to a rare technique, temora called, which is a kind of speaking in anagrams. Let's say reversing or replacing letters in a word in such a way to convey, let's say, hidden meanings. In that sense, one proposal is that Armageddon would be, let's say, a modified form of Harmagedol, by the way, in parentheses, both by way of isopsephy coming up to the same number, 304, and closing the parentheses. This Harmagedol would be an abbreviation of the Hebrew Roma Hagadolah, which would be the Great Rome. Examples like these are more in modern etymological proposals. But I like what R.H. Charles says, that from the perspective of such speculative proposals, he says, everything connected with the text and meaning of the phrase is uncertain. And another example, actually, it's probably one of the main proposals to date, is that Armageddon would stand for mountain of assembly, which in Hebrew is, of course, different. It's Har Moed, found in Isaiah 14:13. And the proposal is that this Hebrew compound has been altered by a later redactor. And this would be in reference to Jerusalem, which appears in many prophetical texts as the place of the final eschatological battle. So the battle is either in Jerusalem or in its vicinity. However, of course, without entering into details, there are transliteration problems, and these are not the only problems of these kinds of proposals. But I noted just for you to see that when you take a Hebrew term and you suppose that, when you take a Greek term and you suppose it's simply a transliteration of something that comes from Hebrew, you have to account for the correspondences between consonants, vowels, and so on. And in this case, precisely, it doesn't fit, it doesn't work. There are some scholars that bring out these kinds of discrepancies, to discard this kind of proposals. Therefore, there is another type of proposal, which I called it historical-typological. They build on the geography of Israel and not on the etymology of the key term. They either build on the notion of Megiddo alone or on a combination of Megiddo, plain of Megiddo, and a mountain related to that place, but carrying a different name, such as the most famous Mount Carmel. William Shea, for example, hypothesizes that the waters of Megiddo are not in fact called Megiddo, but Kishon. So also the Mount of Megiddo bears another name in reality, he says. This name is Carmel, this being the closest mountainous chain to the plain of Megiddo. Beyond topographical proximity, Shea brings certain parallels between Revelation 16:12 to 16 and the famous episode in 1 Kings 18. The most important of these are the following: as a symbol of the civil powers, the dragon parallels Ahab in Elijah's time. The beast in Revelation 13:1 to 8 and the woman in Revelation 17:18 alluded to in 16:13 parallels Jezebel, who, although not present at the confrontation in 1 Kings 18, was behind the idolatrous cult of Israel. The false prophet is clearly the counterpart of Baal's prophets. Elijah, as the true prophet, came from the east in Gilead, just as the kings who will conquer the eschatological Babylon proceed from the east. Fire and sword, which devour the enemies during the battle, the actual Armageddon day, echo the fire and the sword with which Elijah defeated the false prophets of his time. I'm not going to comment on that. I'm going to say that there is still another way of explaining the term Armageddon, which is a symbolic explanation. Although Luther puts forward an etymological explanation of Armageddon, as we have seen before, he makes more sense of the term when he represents it as the battlefield where kings and princes will fight their last battle against the gospel. Again, contextualizing this in the terms of his epoch. Other symbolic proposals, for example, Armageddon would be the unspecified site of the decisive battle of end times, or the defeat of the world in the final conflict, or the final decisive conflict. Sometimes this takes literal form. Some others prefer to speak of more of a symbolism. There will be a confrontation, but not in terms of two armies side face to face. Now, the Old Testament Megiddo background, which I am going to go to, is motivated by the lack of consensus among the scholars with regards to the identity of the mountain. So some expositors simply gave up the notion of mountain and simply focused on Megiddo. Medieval scribes already show signs of this tendency, as some of them only have Magedon with just two delta, or Magedon with just one delta, alongside other minor varieties, Magedod or Magidon or Makedon without gamma but with kappa. So no Armageddon, just Megiddo in different forms. The 12 occurrences of the Hebrew proper noun, Megiddo, are not transliterated uniformly. There are not less than 5 forms that the Septuagint takes to replace it. And I'm not going to read it all, but you can see it shortly. The unique Megiddon is found only in Zechariah 12:11 and is rendered in the Septuagint by the participle, as I mentioned, cutting off or massacre, if you want. Some early church fathers, like Tychonius or Ecumenius Andreas, preferred a rendition in Zechariah 12:11 because the Hebrew form Megiddon, probably because the Hebrew form Megiddon and John's Magedon are very, very similar. However, since the context in Revelation 16:16 is marked by the eschatological war motif, we must look for backgrounds of Old Testament battles involving Megiddo. In chronological order, the military confrontations around Megiddo in the Old Testament are four. Sisera versus Barak in Judges 5, Ahaziah versus Jehu in 2 Kings 9, Necho II versus Nebuchadnezzar, but also versus Josiah in that context in 2 Kings 23 and 2 Chronicles 35, and also the war against Jerusalem as described in Zechariah 12. In my estimation, and I cannot put out all the evidence for that, is that the third proposal would probably be the best as Old Testament background, and the second would be Zechariah 12:11, already seen in the history of interpretation. The eschatological Babylon meeting, it's Megiddo. This would be the last part. In 2018, one scholar noticed, he's not the only one, but he is very precisely or very clear in that direction. He says King Josiah's death at Megiddo is most informative for John in the context of Armageddon. And there is a Carchemish Megiddo typology. The sixth plague begins with a mention of the great river Euphrates. At the end of the 7th century BC, Babylon was on the rise, and it conquered the capital of Assyria, Nineveh, in 612 BC. Its expansion required a decisive battle against the remainder of Assyria and their allies, primarily Egypt, which took place in 605 at Carchemish, at the Euphrates River. Armageddon is the place where the kings of the earth, in comparison, gather for the battle of the great day of God Almighty. In the light of Josiah's background story, Assyria, helped by Egypt, anticipates the beast being helped by the 10 horns or kings in 17, 12, and 13. Within this framework, Armageddon echoes Carchemish, the place of the decisive battle. In that sense, John tells us that the eschatological battle will not be a success for the rulers of the earth. History repeats itself. But there is something more. The Carchemish battle, that is the final battle, the decisive battle at the eschaton, will be preceded by a Megiddo-like catastrophe. By the term Armageddon, John subtly targets the apocalyptic Queen Babylon, which will be destroyed just as King Josiah was killed before the final battle. That is Revelation 17:16. The eschatological Babylon is an unfaithful, idolatrous Jerusalem, which will be punished by those who supported her, and she will be lamented for, just as Josiah was mourned for. And here I am. I came at the end of it.
Okay, thank you very much, Laurentiu, for your interesting presentation. Now we will go to the questions section. So if you have a question, please raise your hand in the Zoom feature, or just unmute yourself and ask the question.
Or comment, maybe, suggestion.
Nathan, please.
I am unmuted now. Okay. I had a question, when it comes to reception, the question in the back of my mind is always motivation. And so, you were talking about the, symbolic interpretation, historical interpretations, and so forth. Have you spent any time getting into the motivations behind why certain expositors, whether in modernity or antiquity or the Middle Ages or the Reformation, I think with Luther it's very clear, right? He has a pretty antagonistic relationship with Rome, and he makes it very clear in his interpretation. Kind of takes whatever he needs nearby to take a whack at Rome. But I'm just wondering if you've looked at all at the earlier interpretations, or indeed modern interpretations, like what is actually motivating these interpretations? Is there, I'm thinking of like Andreas, for example, Andrew of Caesarea. He has a very strong ethical bent to his interpretation of Revelation. Like, do the larger trends in interpretations in these books show up in these isolated interpretations of Megiddo or Armageddon, uh, or how? I'd just be interested to understand the
Mhm, mhm.
motivations if you've looked into that.
Yes. Although I was not let's say, aware in your terminology about this important component of reception history, I was wondering myself, without knowing about this motivation vocabulary, that it should be an explanation behind their options. What I noticed is that I was actually quite shocked to see that the term Armageddon is almost not used by the fathers. When I say fathers, I'm not referring to commentators of Revelation, but the rest. I mean, I would have expected, at least when they lived in troubling times, when they had problems with persecution, let's say beginning of fourth century or mid third century, to make use of this biblical motif and try to describe and encourage, the church. Look, Armageddon is coming, or it's here, but it's okay. God will be on our side, and so on. But it's not there, so they don't use the term, which was shocking to me. And even the first, like Hippolytus and few of the ones that try to explain the term, they focus mainly on the etymology. Usually, what I noticed in my activity is that you resort to, this is English, when you go to etymology, is in when you have no other explanation, and you hope that by turning the term upside down, you might find something new or relevant. Yes, I noticed that Luther, probably because of his, I don't know, temperament, context, he was more willing to contextualize this and really describe his age in terms of Armageddon. But again, I cannot say so much about the motivation because I think they don't really go into that. I don't know why. In modern era, by the way, I didn't use that in the paper because again, the paper is more technical. But I noticed that there is a lot of contextualization when you come to modernity. So yeah, thank you. That's what I can say.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. Oh, Ian, please go ahead.
Hi, Christian. Thanks very much. Thank you, Laurentiu. That's really interesting. Just want to go back to your beginning part where you talked about the early commentators. And I've got my copy of Andrew Caesarea here. It was
Yes.
just very interesting. And Nathan commented on his ethical perspective. And it's just fascinating to see he comments on Armageddon and immediately then comments on the previous verse and goes on and talks about, not being naked and our deeds and virtues. So, he's exactly right. Looking for the virtue consequence, the practical pastoral consequence of that from a devotional point of view. But I was just really interested in your observation that both Andrew of Caesarea and I think it was Orchomenius as well talked about the cutting, which is of course actually a legitimate etymological deduction from the Hebrew Megiddo, if it's from Gadad, but they don't comment on that. And I just wondered, it was really interesting that Bede seems to be recycling existing ideas, whereas these other two appear to be doing something reasonably sound methodologically, or they don't give any explanation for it. I mean, did you have any sense of any of these people who actually are actually doing etymological exercises, or are they simply passing on or sifting ideas that they've heard? I don't know how you tell that.
Yes, thank you. Well, my impression was that I think they knew the Greek text very well, unlike us. And I think they were aware of various forms. I try to show that on a few slides. There's a lot of variety in terms of how they rendered in Greek the Hebrew term. In Hebrew, it's more uniform. And there's just one exception in Zechariah 12:11, where you have a final N in Hebrew, which is required by Armageddon in the Greek of John. And I tend to believe that that's the reason why they thought it might be the one, out of many occurrences of Megiddo related terms. This was the one that ended in N, and probably, and this was the only one not transliterated, not transliterated, but simply almost translated. It's a different rendition, and it's not simply going in like in a transliteration, consonant for consonant and vowel for vowel. So that's why I think they stopped at Zechariah. But there is also let's say an exegetical or theological reason. Zechariah 12 speaks of the final attack on Jerusalem. Actually, it's Zechariah 12 to, I think, to the end, to 14. So these is probably, I'm not totally familiar with the entire motif, but I think it was already known, or they were exposed to this idea that the final battle is related to Jerusalem. And at least if I'm thinking from a different perspective now of this paper, I'm thinking of the people traveling to Jerusalem so that the end of times catches them there. So I think the idea was present somehow, and it worked well with this conception.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Anyone else has any question I would like to, or other? Colin, please go ahead.
Oh, hey, Christian. Yeah, I just had a quick question. Thank you for the amazing presentation. And I'm on sabbatical, so I'm not in my office and I don't have my stuff with me, but my ears perked up when you talked about Jerome saying something about the uprising of the roof for this. And I know I've looked a little bit into Gog and Magog, and I know that in some of these early medieval commentaries on Revelation, I think especially Primasius and then some others, they take a definition, I think also from Jerome, about how Gog and Magog are rendered as, I think in Latin it's tectum and detectum, like covered and uncovered. And I wonder, and of course that refers to another eschatological confrontation. And I wondered if you could say anything about that, about the, I guess, kind of similarity of these words being defined by Jerome.
Thank you. Well, honestly, I struggled with this. When I saw those four differences, I was happy that he said, but most probably the last two, not the first two, because at least, they make a little more sense in the context of the text. Sometimes I felt, and I saw that other scholars believe the same, that if they had a particular mountain in mind, its geographical form, so to speak, they, sometimes some definitions might have been influenced by that, like a round mountain, for example, because certain mountain was more soft, not sharp, and so on. But more than that, unfortunately, I cannot say because I have no idea. It's interesting anyway how he puts up four definitions. I suppose he didn't invent them. They were probably somehow in circulation, or at least he heard them somewhere. He was aware of them. It's not just an invention of him. Otherwise, I'm thinking if you are the first to propose, you would not necessarily make a long list. You would like to be readily going to the solution you believe in. Yeah. Thank you. Anyway, it's an excellent question.
Thank you.
If I could jump in at that point, isn't it a pattern within Andrew, though, that it is a pattern within Andrew that he seems to provide as many interpretations as he knows. So it's often that he'll say, some say this, some say that, and then he'll give a third one. And it seems that very often his preference would be the last one. So that would seem to fit a pattern of how Andrew is working. And very often, of course, he's referring to Ecumenius not long before him. So, yeah, the approach that you outlined there seems to fit a pattern of how at least Andrew would be working with the 4 explanations with a preference towards several.
Sure.
But sorry, I think I saw another hand. I'll quiet up.
Is there
Maybe
anyone
perhaps I would, hello, if you allow me, I would probably maybe inquire from Professor Laurentiu, what would be the contemporary thinking like be? Because here in Africa, when a difficult situation faces people, they easily refer to it as Armageddon. Like what is happening in Tanzania now, people would easily say Armageddon has come. I don't know whether you are able to relate that term to apocalypse, because in the Western world, sometimes people will talk about apocalypse, but here in Africa, sometimes people would talk about Armageddon. I don't know whether in your own research, you are able to relate Armageddon with apocalypse in terms of revelation of a difficult situation in life. How did you find the two terms aligning with each other?
Thank you. Well, interestingly, I live in I am from Romania. I live in Romania, and in the Orthodox context, because Romania is 80+% Orthodox, so Eastern Christianity. Apocalypse actually means in our official dictionary of our language means cataclysm, destruction. So it's really it's synonymous with what we would say Armageddon. Of course, Armageddon is more technical inside Revelation. Is not used in the streets, but unless people are educated in the Bible. But still, it's interesting to see that, like you mentioned, the term apocalypse is equivalent in common vocabulary in my language with destruction and final cataclysm. Now, in terms of Armageddon, I would say it actually, if you define apocalypse as the final, conflict or the final destruction, as I said, in that case, the two terms would be synonymous, because Armageddon, at least inside Revelation, is related to the battle in chapter 19. And if you wish, some scholars, I notice, talk about premillennial Armageddon and post-millennial Armageddon, if we are to refer to Revelation 20 as well. Actually, some of the early commentators, I noticed, they conflate, or at least they want to say that Armageddon mentioned in Revelation 16, it's actually recapitulated in Revelation 20. I noticed that a few times. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
Any question, comment? In the meantime, I do have one. The idea of a eschatological battle is already present in Qumran, right? And then we are going to find it like in apocryphal depictions of the end that are not necessarily influenced by Revelation. Do you think that at any point the idea of Armageddon as conceived only by Revelation within the what we call New Testament kind of like mixed into the general idea of the eschatological battle that was in other documents?
Well, let me enlarge. The question is excellent, actually. Let me enlarge this a little bit. We know the ancient world by texts. A lot of things were going on orally. And I wanted to emphasize this because, again, I think that even the Bible writers, of course, if someone believes that they got information, supernaturally, still, probably we would not go that far to say they simply, write down by dictation. So they expressed what they knew, what they wanted to say, what they have been revealed, let's say. They expressed that in terms of, in common notion or vocabulary that they were used. I tend to believe that John does not simply, coin a term when he says Armageddon in 1616, but probably there was something going on. Something circulating in that sense. Although, of course, it's curious that we don't find it somewhere else around the same time. But however, the motif we do find. It's clearly that, the final battle, as you say, you find it in Second Temple literature. You find it of course, in the Old Testament. So I'm just supposing that at least maybe in Asia Minor, in those communities, the term was not totally like a surprise, like something that they could not, figure out. It's interesting that he doesn't bother, for example, to to let's say to translate the term. He does that with Abaddon, right, in chapter 9, because his audience might not understand. So, for sure, they would not understand because they were Greek speaking. So he said, okay, or Apollonian Greek. But he does not do that with Armageddon, which is interesting, in a sense. It might have ringed some bells without being necessary to have it translated. Thank you.
Nathan, you wanted to add something or ask a question?
Of course. Let's
Yeah.
unmute myself. I've actually asked two, and I see Jean-Michel is asking one, so I'm going to defer.
Okay. Good day, everyone. I'm speaking from Montreal. So thank you for this presentation, Laurentius. And maybe just one point, very small point. I think in French as well, the word apocalypse or apocalyptic, particularly the adjective, is used in a very, let's say, very negative term or sense today, meaning mostly cataclysmic. It's very common, at least in the common language. And very often this word, adjective and noun, are probably used in a wrong way, even in French. I just wanted to say for your information, and I'm going to look into this. I did not have the time to do the research myself right now because I'm pretty busy, but I'm working a little bit on early modern commentaries on the book of Apocalypse, of the book of Revelation, I'm sorry, and particularly English ones. And I gave a presentation in Montreal 2 years ago that Colin attended, mostly interpretations by people like John Floyer, William Whiston, from the 17th century and 18th century. And I'm pretty sure that there could be some interesting ideas to find about their understanding and interpretation of Armageddon. So I'm going to look into this and send you some notes about that.
That would be excellent. Thank you. I realize that between, post-Reformation to modern times, I think the term is even more used than before and more contextualized. So thank you. Yeah, I think it's excellent. Look forward to read some. Thank you.
Yeah, all I wanted to do, Laurentiu, is you alluded several times to your article, and I just thought, is there anything you want to add from the larger, or you said I don't know if it's a book you're working on or an article that you're working on, of which this is a bit of a part, but is there anything you'd kind of like to add on about the article that you think would be helpful for us to understand your context that you're working in?
So thank you, thank you. The article is, as I said, focused on semantics of the term, trying to see the proposals and then make sense of it. But of course, I did not want to refrain to this technical things. So I wanted to go into, okay, exegetically speaking, is there an answer? You know, what would that mean inside Revelation, at least in the context of Revelation? So my proposal was, and the case is built in the second part, which I just skimmed at the end of my presentation. The idea is that I think Josiah's death is the background that John might have had in mind when he talked about Armageddon, and practically speaking, Josiah's death, which is extremely negative compared to his amazing life, Josiah's death is very, very similar in the chroniclers with Ahab's death. So they die very similarly. There are so many parallels between Ahab and Josiah. So Josiah is really a negative actor or a negative character. And he is symbolized, or not symbolized, paralleled with the woman in Revelation 17, which again is very similar to, the right church, but it's not the right church, it's the wrong church, if I should say in these terms. It's not the pure woman in 12. That's a past story. It tries to be to show off and show herself well, but it's actually a betraying character. So in that sense, that's my contribution. I would say that Josiah's death explains the death of Babylon,
Right.
or
So
destruction of Babylon.
right. So so in that case, would you say that the writer of Revelation is like alluding to the Jews, or is this happening in a Jewish context, or like this, the so-called synagogue of Satan, which appears, I think, in chapter 2 or chapter 3? Is it something like that going on, or
well,
Edmundo Lupieri and Penchaud recently have this book where they kind of approach this all from the
this one?
Yeah, I reviewed that book. It was a fun book.
Yeah, I've read it. Yeah.
Yeah. So are you coming at it from like that perspective? This is all happening in a kind of like a Jewish context, and therefore the allusion to Josiah would make a lot of sense because it's a well-known topos.
Exactly. Well, I'm not totally in tune with the book. I do recognize that in terms of the first century, yes, they had it. They were in conflict or in trouble with Judaizers, at least, or whatever you want to call them. The synagogues that were trying to make their lives, Christians' lives, maybe harder. But I don't think it's the main reason. In fact, reading in the 21st century Revelation, it's different. I don't think there's any Jewishness or ethnical thing that is attached, except in the first century, of course. But I don't think it should guide or control, the reading today. I think the reading is beyond that, and John specifically uses a more general terminology, if I should say so.
Good. Thank you very much.
Thank you for having me.
Yeah, well, we have 2 minutes left. All I want to do is give a quick look into the future, if we can do that. So our next session will be on December 4th. That will be Giovanni Di Russo, who will be giving a talk on the earliest translation of Revelation into Arabic, ? Examining the book of Revelation in the Arabic Apocalypse of Peter. He actually presented, Jean-Michel and I were there at NAPS in Chicago, and Giovanni presented, and he began to discuss this already a little bit. So this will be a focused look at potential earliest reception or translation of Arabic Apocalypse. I think that'll be very interesting. And then 1 week after that, exactly December the 11th, we'll be having our first ever book review session, where Martina Vercesi has a book on the early North African reception of the last chapters of Revelation. Humphrey Waweru, who's on this call, his book will be reviewed, and then the book that I recently wrote will also be reviewed by Ian Boxall, who's also here. So that will be the first 2 weeks, the first 2 Thursdays of December. And then there will be a pause until February 2nd. And then Lynn Huber from Elon will be joining us talking about light space, good space, Revelation's throne room as white mythic space. So again, that will be after the break, after the long year-end break on February the 2nd. So we have a lot going on. I think I'm really looking forward to what's going on. But I think before ending here, let's give another round of virtual applause to Laurentiu. Thank you for joining us and sharing your research with us. All the best as it goes to publication, and be sure to send that message, send the link to us, and then we'll distribute it within the network. I think that'd be interesting.
Thank you very much. Appreciate it.
I think that's it for now. See you all on December the 4th. Bye-bye.